I'm going to be talking about what the new Scrum Guide changes are. And so just did research and really just trying to compare and contrast what the previous Scrum Guide changed, rather what the previous Scrum Guide was and what the new Scrum Guide is. What are the changes? What are the things that as Scrum Masters or as Agilists we should be aware of? How does it affect how we lead our team? How does it affect how we manage our team? How does it affect how we talk about agile? How does it affect even the transformation? And not just from a Scrum Master's perspective, but even from the organizational point of view, the new changes, how does it really affect everything, right? Because at the end of the day, Scrum Masters, yes, might be leading a team, but the team, they're carrying out tasks, they're rolling out products, they're working on software, hardware, whatever that might be, that also affects the goals of the company, the goals of the client, and all that. So Scrum is a framework, yes, and that framework really affects every part of the organization, right? And that's why if you remember the previous Scrum Guide, when they break down what the responsibilities are for the Scrum Master, there's one that is Scrum Master for the team, Scrum Master for the product owner, I believe, and the Scrum Master for the organization. So as a Scrum Master, you're not just only serving your team, you're also serving organization, product owner, and then your team. So that's kind of like an overview. And so today we're going to be talking about what are the changes? What are the changes? I don't know. Have you guys figured out what the changes are? What do you think about the changes? Let me know in the chat, in the comment section. Are you excited, or are you like, business as usual? Nothing is really changing. I'm just going to be doing what I'm already doing. My team is great. Or I don't want to talk about these changes, whatever that is. But I just feel like as Scrum Masters, as Agilists or product owners or developers, whoever is working within the Scrum framework, it's always very important to stay in tune with what the changes are, because the good thing about Scrum really is it evolves. It's a framework where you can use it best to what works for your team, and so it's always very good to be up to date with what the changes are, and in that way it just makes your mind fresh and you can really serve your team better. And so that's why I'm always really plugged into whatever is going on in the agile world. And so if you see me looking this way or that way, I have notes, and I'm going to be going over everything. And feel free to ask questions, and let's discuss about what these changes are and what do they really mean for you as a Scrum Master, or for you who probably works within a Scrum team or the agile framework, right? So let me do this. I'm going to talk about like quick overview of what these changes are, and then later on I'm going to do like a little bit of a deep dive to each of this. So now the overview of changes on the new Scrum Guide. Number one, there is a less prescriptive language. What do I mean by that? Less prescriptive language. So the new Scrum Guide doesn't really they don't give details of what they expect you to do, because they want it to be fluid and give the opportunity for Scrum Masters to use the framework in the way that works best for them. So the first thing is less prescriptive language. The second one is it's more clearer and it's more universal. And what does that mean? The new Scrum Guide now is written in a way where it's not just centered towards maybe the technology industry. Like they want it to be is a framework that can be used and implemented regardless of the industry. So it could be marketing, it could be creative, it could be at schools, right? And so now it's more clearer, it's more universal, and it's a guide. So that's one of the the new changes with the new Scrum Guide, right? The third thing is there are also changes regarding the Scrum artifacts and what their corresponding commitments are. And like I said earlier on, I'm going to do a deep dive as to what these things are. I'm just giving you a quick overview of what the changes looks like, right? So the Scrum artifact now have corresponding commitments, and there's a change to that. The next change, which is quite interesting, is the Scrum Master has moved, I won't say moved, has evolved from being a servant leader to a leader who serves. From being a servant leader to a leader who serves. And the Scrum team now, we're no longer using the word self-managing. It's now self-organizing. I'm loving it. It's not self-managing, self-organizing. The last but not the least, the sprint planning, they've added a new topic. And so usually in the sprint planning, we'll talk about, what are we doing and how are we doing it? Now they've added a new thing as to why. Why are we working on this? Why are we developing? No longer what and how, but why. So that's the overview of the changes on the Scrum Guide, right? And so let me kind of like do a deep dive as to what each of these things I just talked about so far. So let's start from the top. Less prescriptive language. What I want of the overview. What does less prescriptive language really means is that it's just making it just a framework where the guide can be used as intended. When you hear the word guide, it means it's to guide you, right? Say you can do this, you can do that. This is probably the consequence or the advantage or the disadvantage. And so not necessarily telling you do A, then do B, do C, do D. You as a Scrum Master, you come to an environment and figure out what works for your team. And so if you want to go the other route, absolutely sure. So it's no longer prescriptive. Why? Because it's giving room for Scrum Masters to be innovative, to think for themselves, to use the guide in a way that works best for their team, to be able to adapt, right? To use the framework, keeping the integrity of the framework, but giving room for innovation and adaptation. Right? And so it's more about empowering the Scrum team and the organization to use the guide as it was intended. So it's a rule book. It's not a playbook. It's a rule book. There are rules. It's a guide. It's not a play-by-play book. So that is one of the major changes in the new Scrum Guide. And I think that is great, because I've had a lot of people who talk about, things have to be done a certain way. Not necessarily. We maintain the integrity of the ceremonies, of the roles and responsibilities. But if you come and look at what's going on right now with the whole COVID situation. If you're saying, we have to keep to the 3 questions we ask during daily stand-up, maybe it doesn't work for virtual teams. Maybe you need to switch things up, right? Maybe you need to add some spice to it because you're no longer within the same environment. So it's all about being agile, all about being fluid, all about being flexible, giving room for innovation. And you as a Scrum Master using the Scrum Guide as a rule book, like, okay, what works for my team, and not a play-by-play book, because then you are literally doing what is, you are going anti-agile if you're using it as a playbook. Now, the second change I talked about is it's clearer and it's now a more universal Scrum Guide, right? Where the Scrum Guide can be used regardless of the industry, the domain, the product, or the function, or whatever it is that is being developed. And that's why they've updated it so that it's more accessible and it's also more understandable for everyone, far beyond the technology industry or technology business. And I think this is so important because Scrum is a framework that can be adapted regardless of the industry, right? And that's why I love the first point about it's not a playbook, it's a rule book. Because in a marketing company, you can use the ceremonies anywhere you want. You can have, you can have this product owner, you can have a Scrum Master, you can have a development team, even if they're not developers, right? You could have a team, a creative team. And so now they've made it more universal that regardless of the industry, regardless of the domain, it can be the guide can be understood by everyone. It can be accessible beyond the technology business, beyond the technology industry. And so I think this is great for anyone who probably wants to really make things happen in their industry if it's not technology, and see, how can we use the Scrum framework so that we can develop things better, we can build things better. It doesn't have to be technology. It could be business, it could be creative, it could be education. Again, Scrum is really just a framework that makes things, you're able to inspect, you're able to adapt, you're able to put out things out there in increments, you're able to go back to the drawing board and make changes and give out or put out, products, materials, that will meet the needs of your client. And so again, the new Scrum Guide 2020 is saying, hey guys, it doesn't have to be only the tech industry that's using the Scrum framework. Any industry, any domain, whatever it is you're working on, you can understand it, you can implement it. And I think this is a win for everybody. Let me know if you agree. I think this is a win for everybody. Now, the third third change that was done in the new Scrum Guide 2020 is the Scrum artifacts and its corresponding commitment. Now, I really, really like this. Why? Because it's so important that they added something called the product goal. And I think that was what was really missing. And so now, for starters, the product backlog commitment is the product goal, right? And what that means is now the team is working on whatever it is they're working on during the sprint, and they have an idea of what the product goal is. usually there's always either a hit or miss regarding that. Like they're not really sure what they're working on. They know that it's a sprint goal, they know the increment, but what is the product goal? And that is one of the new commitment that have been added with the new Scrum Guide 2020, right? And so the commitment for the product backlog is the product goal, and the product goal describes a future state of the product at which the Scrum team is working towards. Right? It's the future state of the product at which the Scrum team is working towards. And this emerges, this grows, this evolves as the Scrum team keeps working sprint by sprint by sprint. Now, we all know what the sprint goal is. The sprint goal is a commitment, right, from the sprint backlog. I think we're all aware of that. If you're not aware of that, really, the sprint goal gives the team coherence and focus while they're working on the particular sprint. The last but not the least is the increment. So the commitment for the definition of done is the increment. So whatever the team works on at the end of a sprint, a working software, that is the increment, right? So for sprint by sprint, the increments are added, just being put together, and it evolves and it grows and it builds and all that. So that was one of the thing that got changed as well in the new Scrum Guide recently. Now, the next one, which I also really love, is the Scrum Master has evolved. I like to say the word evolved from a servant leader to a leader who serves. And I believe the reason behind this was they wanted to put more emphasis on leader. And why am I saying this? Because most of my students will say, okay, so what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to help my team? And I tell them, you help them remove impediments, you work with them, you make sure that they have a great environment where they can work and they can function. You coach, you facilitate, you lead, you look at your reports, you make great suggestions to management, you look around, you're proactive. So while I'm giving them all these things that they should do as a leader, oftentimes they get into the environment and it seems that their power has been stripped from them, and it seems that all they're doing is just going here and here. Oh, are you okay? Do you want me to get you coffee? Do you want me to get you tea? During sprint planning, you see them maybe bringing donuts, which is great. You're making the team relax. You're letting them know that you're their advocate. But in all honesty, there is much more that you can do than bringing donuts to your team. And I also believe that this is the reason why most organizations don't understand the power behind having a Scrum Master. And that's the truth. Some companies will say, why do we need to hire a Scrum Master when the team can work by themselves? Why do we need to bring someone on board? Because they haven't truly understood why a Scrum Master is so important to how the team functions, to how the team works together, to teamwork, to growth, to stability, to focus. And this is why they moved it from being a servant leader to being a leader who serves. Emphasis again on leadership, right? Because the Scrum Master is not just a facilitator. That's the honest truth. You are a mentor, you're a coach, you teach, you're a teacher. There's so much that you can do really as a Scrum Master. You're not a manager, but you wear so many hats, right? You are way beyond just facilitating Scrum events and Scrum ceremonies. You're not passive, you are active, you are proactive, right? And great Scrum Masters do what must be done to help the Scrum team and the organization achieve great results. So you are a leader. That's the honest truth. You are a leader, right? You're just not a facilitator only, but you wear so many hats. And that is why, servant leader to a leader who serves, I think is definitely the great definition of a Scrum Master. What do you think? Let me know in the chat. Do you agree to this? Okay. Now, the next point is that the next change that was made is we now have a unified team focused on one product. A unified team focused on one product. This is interesting because I remember one of my classes that I was teaching, and I kept interchanging saying development team and Scrum team, and someone was asking, so what is the difference? Why a development team and why a Scrum team? And I kept explaining to them that the development team, they're the team they're the ones that do the actual work, that they weren't building, that they weren't coding, that they weren't developing. But the Scrum team is a combination of the development team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. And it was kind of like weird because it's like development team. So are they a separate team? Now the new Scrum Guide have merged all of that together. There is no development team. everybody is part of a Scrum team. So it's no longer a mindset of you versus us, which usually happen because, first of all, you have the product owner who probably doesn't want to come for a daily stand-up, who feels like he is by the side, and you have the Scrum Master who is like leading the team, and they have development team working on their own. Now the new Scrum Guide is saying there is no difference. Everybody's working together towards one goal, towards one product goal, towards one sprint goal. And I think that is so smart because it enhances cohesion, it enhances teamwork. It's no longer a separation of roles and responsibilities, which it is, but it's still, it increases just teamwork, really. And that's what I think this is absolutely great. Everybody's one Scrum team focused on the same objective, even if they have different set of roles, responsibilities, and accountability. So everybody is together. It's no longer the product owner versus us, or the Scrum Master versus us, or the development team members feeling like everybody's against them. No. Everybody is working together towards one product objective or product goal or product feature. All right. So now the next change that was made is self-managing versus self-organizing. And you know, when I saw this, I was like, so what is the difference between self-managing versus self-organizing? Now, self-managing is, have you ever been in a situation where you realize that your Scrum Master, your developers just feel like they can do whatever they want to do at whatever time they want to do it, because, hey, we're self-organizing, we can do whatever I want to do. Now, that is the reason why they've turned it from self-organizing to self-managing. Because in self-managing, you have a higher level of responsibility at what you're doing. So you have to manage your work. You're not just choosing what you want to do at what you want to do at the time you feel like doing it. Now you're responsible and you're accountable for the work that you do, right? And so that's the reason why they've made it self-managing. We're no longer a self-organized team. They kept the cross-functional. It's cross-functional, but self-managing, not just self-organizing, right? Self-managing team. So they focus on what they have to work on, who is doing it, and how it will be done. What are we working on? Who is going to work on it, and how will it be done? Usually it would be either what are we working on and who is doing it, and no one's asking the question of how will it be done. No, they've organized, we know what we're going to work on, we know who is doing it, but no one asks how. So now it's all the three major questions. Who is going to be doing it? What are we working on, and how will it be done? That is a true definition of a self-managing team, right? Okay, now the next change that was made in the Scrum Guide is the sprint planning topics. Now, doing sprint planning, most times the team come together and they talk about, that the product owner would, go over the backlog, and we're looking at what the priorities are, and they're figuring out, okay, so what are we going to be working on, and who is going to be working on it? So how are we going to be doing this? Are you doing this story point? Are you doing this story? Are you doing this user story? We do the estimation, and we do all that great stuff going on. Most times they don't usually talk about why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? So that is what has been added now for the sprint planning. Not just what are we doing, not just how are we doing, but now why are we doing it? And I think that just gives us a greater level of not just focus, but there's a word that I'm looking for, when you feel like you're a part of something. I understand why I'm doing this. So I bring a different energy to the table. I bring a different kind of, concentration to the table, because now I know why. I know why the client wants this. Not just because he told me to do it, not just because he said it's priority, but there is a why behind that priority. The way I would work on it will be so different than if you just give me multiple tasks, or you give me one task and everybody just doing things just because they say we have to do it. So that is one of the things that was added as well, is the why. I think that was also absolutely fantastic as well. So those are like the overview of the changes that were done in the new Scrum Guide. And I'm going to quickly go over what is no longer in the Scrum Guide. Yes, they kind of like took some things out. Not necessarily took some things out, but made changes. I'm going to go over that quickly. The first thing is the parking lot after the daily Scrum. Now, I know that the parking lot is in vogue right now because of COVID, where the 15 minutes is never enough time. And so the team have many things they want to talk about later. And usually the Scrum Master will be like, okay, put in the parking lot. We're going to talk about that either after the daily stand-up. And most times after the stand-up is over, Scrum Master can then say, if you're no longer, if you don't have anything to talk about, if you don't have any further conversation, you can go on and work on what you want to work on. Everything in the parking lot is going to be discussed after this, right? Now, what they've done in the new Scrum Guide is they are giving the almost like the autonomy to the Scrum Master to do the parking lot whenever he or she wants to do it. So it doesn't have to be after the daily stand-up. It doesn't have to be after the 15-minute time box. No, it's have that conversation anytime you want to do it, in any place you want to do it. That was one of the things that they kind of like made modification on. Does it make a huge difference? I guess it does if you're maybe a Scrum Master who you do your parking lot after your daily stand-up, right? And usually I actually do that because that's the best way to continue the conversation. So now they're saying it doesn't have to be after. It could be before. It could not before. It could be next day. It could be somewhere else and all that. So I think that's really up to the Scrum Master to figure out what's the best time to talk about items that are in the parking lot. If the items in the parking lot are priority, obviously you won't talk about them immediately. If they're affecting something that the team is working on there and then, obviously you won't talk about it as soon as the stand-up is over. If not, so it's kind of like up to you. You can move it whenever you want to move it. Now, the next thing as well that was changed is they removed the word roles, so ROLES. And I think they removed it because they felt like a lot of people were misunderstanding it, which is kind of like interesting. And one of the reasons why they moved it is the guide writers and all that. They said they've never been about, they didn't want to create a taxonomy of titles, right? They didn't want to be very title oriented, right? So what they did was they moved it from roles to accountability. So that, and I think one of the reasons why they don't want to call a Scrum Master a manager, because they don't want people to be boxed in titles. They wanted them to be accountable for their work. And so the entire Scrum team is accountable for creating a valuable and a useful increment every sprint, right? And so Scrum has now defined specific accountabilities within the Scrum team. And so that's the developers. They're accountable for doing the work, for coding or testing. The product owner accountable for ensuring that the team is working on priorities. The team, they have clear focus on what they're working on. They know the why. They know the why. Why are we building this? And the Scrum Master is accountable for ensuring that the team is following the framework. They are self-organized. They are self-managed. They are cross-functional. Their impediments are being removed. They are facilitating the Scrum ceremony. So it's no longer about roles. They're no longer putting emphasis on roles, right? It's now on accountability. And they said as well that if you want to call them roles, it's up to you. But really, accountability is is what they're pushing right now. Now, the next thing that they have removed is in the previous Scrum Guide, a sprint review was kind of like led by the product owner. Now they're saying it's no longer the product owner. Everyone is part of the sprint review. Everybody. So if you, I don't know if you're noticing the trend. They're very team oriented now in this new Scrum Guide, which they were before, but I guess they're taking it up a notch now. So they're saying the prior guide gave the product owner, the lead during the sprint review, and the rest of the Scrum team acted more from a supporting angle, from a supporting role. Now the new 2020 Scrum Guide has the entire Scrum team along with the customers and the stakeholders at the center of this event. So everybody is an active player. The product owner is not just the active and everybody playing and supporting. Everybody's an active player. And I absolutely see that happening. That's how it's always been for me, actually. I play an active role, ensuring that we have the right stakeholders, the key people in the room doing the sprint review, ensuring that the product owners are aware of what we're going to be showcasing or what we're going to be demoing that day. I ensure that my developers are ready to, demo what they've done. They have their slides, they have their talking points, right? And then we ask after we've done the demo, we get feedback from everybody in the room. They ask questions, we answer them, and there are any questions that might take us off track, I always put a pin to it where we can come back to it later. And we have the stakeholders, they're absolutely very involved. We have other Scrum teams, members involved as well. And so everybody's literally playing an active role during the sprint review. And I think that is something that every Scrum Master or every team should really do is you want everyone to play an active role. And another reason why this is so important is so that at the end of the day, you don't finish working on something and stakeholders are kept in the dark and they're like, oh, where were you guys working on this? So what did you do? Or we're not expecting this. To me, that shows that there's a huge communication gap between product owner, between stakeholders, between team. So that sprint demo is a really great point, a great place to really inspect what the team has built, to make adaptations as needed, to go back to the drawing board, to even discuss, maybe challenges that came up or questions and get clarity. So the sprint demo is so important, right? The last but not the least, one of the things that they also made changes or removed from the Scrum Guide is the time box for the backlog refinement. In the previous Scrum Guide, they said, the backlog refinement was going to be not more than 10% of the team's capacity, but now they removed the number from it. So it depends on how long, I guess, you want to do it. And they said removing the number really empowers the Scrum team to decide how much time is needed to refine and understand the product backlog items. How much time is needed to refine and understand the product backlog items. And like I always tell my students, the Scrum Guide is great, but what usually happens on the floor in real life is usually different. They have this, maybe for example, 4 hours for sprint planning. I don't know how many people some people do 4 hour sprint planning, but I've never really done sprint planning, for that long, right? Or 2 hours if you're doing a 2-week sprint, so it kind of like really depends on what works for you and what works for your team. Again, like they said, they don't want the Scrum Guide to be a playbook. They want it more to be just, something that you can use to guide yourself, is a framework. So use the framework for what works best for yourself, for your team, for the organization. And again, just in summary, Scrum is open source. And what that means is use it as you please. Keep the integrity of the framework, but, just use it as what works best for your team. They want it to spread. They want it to be able to empower people to solve complex problems, to achieve big things, to achieve great things. It's not stuck on stone. There is an integrity. The ceremonies are there for a reason. The accountability, the people that fit the certain roles, so the product owner, the Scrum Master, development team, are there for a reason. There's a reason why these things are there, to inspect, to adapt. There's a reason why they have the values, transparency, commitment, respect, just being focused. There's a reason why all of this exists. And I wouldn't say, because it's just a guide, so bend it whatever you want to, as you please, or do your daily stand-up at the end of the day, or do planning in the middle of the sprint. It doesn't, that's not how it works, But all they're saying is keep the integrity, but, influence it to what works best for your team, your organization, and I think for yourself as well as a Scrum Master. And that kind of like brings me to the end of my going over the Scrum Guide 2020 changes. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section. I'm going to be answering them right now. If you have any questions based on what I've said so far, also feel free to put it in the comment section. So let me take the first question. Is it difficult to